Hi, this is Nick Lalonde, your host of What's Next, making your third act your best act. Today you're going to hear from Brian Thomas. Brian has worked as an administrator for over 30 years, making the leap to start his own business back in August of 2012. He now runs 9 skilled nursing facilities and takes pride in how they serve their patients. You can find him with a cup of coffee in hand, walking through any one of the facilities, checking in on his patient's experience as a secret shopper. What stuck out to me in my conversation with Brian is how hard COVID has been on healthcare. Brian said the last 2 years has made him think long and hard about what he wants retirement to look like. He saw his father, who saved and saved, only to have his life cut short. Be sure to listen in when Brian talks about what a typical day in retirement looks like for him. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Brian as much as I did. Brian Thomas with me on the show. He's a fellow Texan like me. Brian, how are you holding up with the weather that we're experiencing this week? We're shooting here in mid-January, and we had some snow a couple days ago.
Well, it's about 10 o'clock this morning. I've had busted sprinkler systems all over the place. So I have been dealing with that and trying to teach people how to fix them. So
And you're never busy, right? You only run, I think you shared with me before, like 9 skilled nursing facilities all over Texas. Is that right?
correct. And I've been
It,
doing that for almost 30 something years. So
wow. And for our listeners, when did you create your own company? When did you go out on your own to do that?
in 2012, I had worked for another company that started up in 2000 and was their first employee. And so I got to learn from the ground up how they started up. Um, they were very kind to let me go out on my own and still work for them for about 2 years. So I had good mentors to show me how to do it by myself. So and I do have a business partner uh, that I've known since he was a college kid. So it's worked out real well for that.
Mm, mm. So you've been doing this for nearly 30 years, right? 30 plus years. Has that started to wear on you at all? Do you ever think about
It is.
retirement?
The last 2 years I've thought about it a lot. I'll turn 56 or 57 in about 3 weeks. And, I know my time is coming to an end sometime to figure out an exit plan.
And what about the last 2 years has made you really think about retirement harder and harder?
Um, in healthcare, COVID has been very, very hard on my employees. It's been hard on me. Uh, and it's one of those things that's made me think, there is something else out there and it's time to start thinking about it.
Mm. And when you start thinking about this retirement journey, what excites you today?
The exciting part, um, I don't know. I still probably will get up early every morning, um, but not being having a schedule as to where to go would probably be fairly nice.
And so not having a schedule, is there anything else that excites you?
Um, I just being able to spend more time maybe with my wife. Uh, we do a lot of charity things, and so probably be more involved with those kinds of groups, um, and being able to spend more time. Now it's work, having to take off to go do something else and try to balance all the different things we're involved in. I'll just be able to spend time doing those things that are fun.
Mm. Yeah, I hear that a lot from my high achievers, especially business owners, the ones who've been working for the last few decades and they've been putting in maybe 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. Sometimes that can lead to burnout. And so when I ask folks what they're most excited about with retirement, they talk about travel, having less structure in their day, right? Being able to wake up maybe a little bit later, not have anywhere to be, maybe being able to spend time with loved ones, with people they haven't seen as much as they would have liked over the last few decades. Has that been the case for you? I mean, has it just been a lot of work?
Um, Especially the last 2 or 3 years. I said with COVID has really changed the healthcare industry a lot. And so,
Hmm.
yes, there's been a lot more hours put in for that. Um, you know, I've always been, my dad worked the same job for 42 years. And
Mm.
so that was always an inspiration to me. That's why I've stayed in my industry this long. Uh, but, he died early. And so he didn't ever get to enjoy those things, getting to spend time with loved ones and traveling and doing those things. So yes, I think about those all the time. And I've tried to look at my exit strategy as, how many years, when will I have that? I feel that I'm comfortable that I can live on what I have saved. Have I made good decisions to do that? And look forward to it.
More so than any other industry, I'm hearing from folks in healthcare they're saying the exact same thing that you just said to me is the last 2 or 3 years have really been a grind and have made people
Yeah.
reevaluate what's ahead. I was talking to one doctor recently and he said, Nick, I'm in my 60s and when I think about my life, I have less time in front of me than I than I do behind me today. And he said that was a really sobering moment and it made me think about how I wanted to spend my time. It sounds like maybe you seeing your dad, right, who had saved, but then didn't really get to enjoy maybe this next phase of life as much as he would have liked. Has that stayed with you? Has that made you think about maybe retiring earlier as a result of that, of just seeing that life can be cut short?
Oh yes. I mean, that's what I try to think, is it 5 years from now when I'm 62, or do I want to wait till I'm 65 or 67? Um, I already say I'm not going to wait till I'm 65. I want to exit. I've saved all my life. Always had good mentors of parents showing me how to save. They've also, were good mentors at showing me how to give to others. So me and my wife every year at the beginning of the year set up our plan as to who we're giving to and how much, and so I think that having those kind of processes helps that when it does come time to retire, that I feel like I'll be ready.
Mm.
I have family members that retired too early, but they didn't because they didn't have the savings, and they struggle now. I don't think I will be like them because my parents been good mentors on how to save.
How will you know when enough is enough? I mean, some of the people I talk to, especially high achievers, they're so used to knocking down one more goal, right? Or having another big win through work. And so how will you know when you're able to step away from work and be financially independent?
Um, I think I'm already trying to put that plan in place now. I also ranch a little bit, so I'll still have a job when I leave. I have several rental properties that they're historical buildings, so they're fun to be a part of. Um, so there'll still be something to do in every day, um, but won't have the schedule, won't have having so much to answer to help others or to answer everybody's questions. I'll be working by myself.
And so could we expect to see you on the next season of Yellowstone as a rancher?
Well, they filmed some of those shows around here, so where I live. So
They're gonna have to ask to use your historical
yeah.
buildings, right? So
Yep. Well, they
they'll
have.
have to,
Actually, they
oh,
have came, Yellowstone has came and toured some of the buildings to use them. And so
how cool. How
for the
cool.
Sam
So
Bass, for the Sam Bass episodes.
yeah, so we'll see you as an extra. I love it. Um, I'm so curious though, what maybe scares you about retirement as you think about this? What maybe is a little daunting for you?
Um, used to having a regular income right now. That will disappear. Um, spending habits, do I have to change them? Um, those things are scary. Um, I do a lot with my grandkids, so I'll be able to still help them. Um, that's a little bit scary because they'll have college and stuff, and I want to make sure that they can attend and all. Main thing is, I think looking at, you know, will you outlive your money? So that's one big thing because and that's just because like I said, I have family members that, went retired too early
Mm.
when they can afford it.
And for you, it sounds like it's not even can you cover your own expenses? It's having the ability to help out the grandkids or having the ability to donate and volunteer to charities, maybe financially. Is that right? So it's
Now,
more that,
I do look at the charity thing because I mean, we've always, my parents gave. I grew up being able to always think that direction, either towards either church or different charities or what, but setting those goals because that you're probably one of sometimes the bigger supporter in some of the smaller little groups.
mm,
I try to do just local, and we do it very methodical. We have a method to it, and I still want to be able to do that,
mhm.
and so.
Is there anything you think you're going to miss about work other than the paycheck?
Um, well, being in the nursing home business, I really enjoy the residents that we serve. And I probably will volunteer some somewhere. Um, just like going and visiting them, and it makes my day. You know.
Do you think it's going to be challenging for you to separate the identity Brian Thomas, the business owner, right, versus just now being a retiree? Will that be emotionally difficult at all for you?
Um, Probably because a couple of my businesses, I live in the area, and so somebody else will be running them. Um, be hard to say they didn't do the way I did it, so um,
Yeah.
that'll be a little bit tough, probably, you know.
Your business probably feels like a child to you in some ways, right?
Oh yes, very, very much. A lot of my employees, I have known some of them since they were kids. Um, some of my other employees are now sometimes some of them are now my patients. Uh, so you know, we've grown together.
Well, Brian, that says a lot about you, right? That your employees want to be your patients and the kids grow up to work for you. I mean, that sounds like you're like a magnet, right? Um, People are just attracted to you. So I think that's awesome in your business. Walk me through what you think a typical day in retirement might look like for you. So let's not think of the highlights like, hey, we're traveling off to Europe this week, but I just want to take a typical Tuesday in retirement.
I will probably go to my farm and either probably be on a tractor or mess on the cows. I have a brother that lives close to me. Probably go do something with him. Um, Probably hang out with my kids, grandkids, sports or whatever they're in at the time. Um, you know, that will probably be about my day.
Well, that makes for a full day, that's for sure. Where do you think you'll find purpose in every day?
Um, I think if I still stay involved with things that I volunteer in, I think there'll be good purpose. I know a man that he's probably 86 years old. He still delivers Meals on Wheels probably 3 or 4 times a week. I see him volunteering at other things. And, you know, if he can do that and find purpose, then I'm sure that I can by just doing some of the same things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What gives you purpose today?
Um, Probably my wife, you know, um, try to, make her happy, I guess. So, and my grandkids, um, they give me a lot of purpose. I see them almost every day. Um, so, those are important things. Um, work, I know I'm here to take care of my employees and to take care of people. Um, and I know that's important. I want to be a good steward, um, to them. And so just strive real hard to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always say in my business, I'm in the people business because, we're not selling a product, we're basically selling people. So, a lot of it's perception if you're being taken care of very well. And so, I think we need to make sure we always have a good perception of how we're taking care of others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so,
I'm curious, do you go into the office most days? Are you there maybe 10, 12 hours a day?
um, used to, yes. Now I probably gotten to where used to I'd go to work at 7:30, leave at 6, 7. Now I'm probably an 8:30 to 4:30. Um, one of my nursing facilities is real close. So I get my cup of coffee. I go over there, walk around. Where our rehab unit is, we have very short-term patients. So I
Mm-hmm.
just walk around, visit with them, never tell them who I am. So after 2 or 3 days, they usually ask, who is that guy that comes by? You know, they're like, he's the owner. And they go, well, I've been telling him all the things I like and don't like.
I
I said, well,
love
that's how
that.
I find out things.
Yeah, you're like a secret shopper, right?
Yeah,
You're,
I'm a secret shopper.
that's awesome. Tell me about as you started to scale back on work, does she stay at home today?
Yes, she
Okay.
worked up until she was an X-ray tech, and so she worked up until about maybe 15 years ago when our youngest was still in high school. We were very active in sports, and so it just made it easier for us to be able to travel and play basketball year round and all.
Yeah, I call the stay-at-home moms the domestic engineers, and I tell everyone we just had a newborn back in August, so my wife is at home with our newborn, but she has a much more challenging job than I do, and I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
you feel the same way.
yes,
Um, but one of the things that
I'm the fun guy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You're the fun guy, which is a fun person to be.
Yeah.
Um, I am curious though, one of the things that I often see is high achievers, they're used to being outside of the home. They may even work 50, 60, 70 hours and typically high achievers are moving on from one project to the next, right? They run at a pretty quick pace. Sounds like you have for a good chunk of your life. Um, when you come back into the home and you're there full time, have you had a conversation yet with your wife about maybe the boundaries or the space she might need? Because she's probably used to having her routine at the house and having her own space, and then you're out of the house. So have you guys ever had a conversation about that?
Um, she trained me well a long time ago, so I know her routine fairly well. Um, there will be more things that we do together, but that's also one of those reasons why I've made sure that I have something to do every day and not just be at the house moping around.
And then
That's
that
one.
way your wife feels like she's not babysitting you, right?
Right.
You have your own thing, she has her own thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I find that so important for a successful transition from work. Um,
Because
one
you,
last question. Yeah, what were
okay.
you gonna say?
Because you asked me, how often I'm in the office. Well, yes, I'm only in the office from probably 8:30 to 4:30, but I probably 3 or 4 mornings go to the farm for 2 or 3 hours before I come to work, or I go after I get off work. So I still have hours that I do, but I do try to work them around what family plans we have and all that. So um, I think I will still have things to do. I don't plan to retire and go home and sit.
Yep. Yep. That's so important. I think it's, keeping staying physically and mentally active, I think is really important as you make this transition. One last question for you that I ask everyone who comes on the show is knowing what you know now, is there anything you would have done differently in your career?
I would have went to work for myself a long time ago. Um, you know, I say that I've saved and everything, but I've also been very, uh, I've been very safe in life. And, I would have probably taken more challenges and, stepped out, not been afraid to. It took me having to watch somebody else, make mistakes and just make a mistake and just say, oh, okay, let's start over again. Or let's walk away and try something else new. And so, I had somebody to watch do that. And so I finally got brave enough to go to work for myself. I wished I would have probably done that sooner. That's probably one of my only regrets. You're working for somebody else, you're basically doing the work. But just stepping out there and not being afraid. And so,
What do you think the result would have been had you gone out on your own 10 years earlier?
May have already been retired. I think they would have probably been about where they are now. Uh, I might have grown more as a company. I right now I don't want to grow. That just means adding more oversight. When I realize my time probably is coming to an end sometime at some day. And so that would probably be really the only thing different.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Brian, this has been awesome having you on the show. What's next? Making your third act your best act. And I appreciate you braving the cold, coming into the office today and hopping on Zoom with me so that our listeners could learn from you and our conversation.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nick. It's a good show.
All righty, sir. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.